Welcome to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Markle. I am a curriculum development specialist here at NCBRT, and I work in collaboration with subject matter experts to create valuable and timely training for the responder community. The National Center for Biomedical Research and Training provides mobile training to both the national and international emergency response community. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we're wrapping up our conversation with Rob Allen and Mark DuPont about some of the unique security challenges that faith-based organizations face when it comes to things like safety and security. So to start off for this last part, what are some unique challenges that faith-based organizations face when responding to a crisis?
Well, I think we can both jump on this one easily. I'm going to try and keep it simple, Rob. Lack of training, lack of awareness, and connectivity to the public safety community. I think those are the foundation of why when faith-based organizations find themselves responding to an event, and let's go all the way back to the first podcast. That event doesn't necessarily have to be all about an active threat, right? It could be natural disaster. It could be technological failures. It could be some events that are happening in their community just spill over to affect them. But I think, unfortunately, faith-based communities, in my opinion, lack the training because they struggle with that balance we talked about in the second podcast. This is a place where it should be comfort and peace, and now we're struggling with recognizing the importance of safety and security.
I think that's a good point. And Mark, several organizations in the community I serve received emailed bomb threats last year. It was widely publicized, so I'm not telling any secrets. And the reactions were fear consistently.
Absolutely.
But what the synagogues did very widely. Some synagogues said, you know what, we're going to go all virtual this week. We're just not going in person in case it's real. And some said, yeah, the likelihood of this being a credible threat is very low. Because several institutions got it, we're just going to continue as usual. The most poignant phone call I had was with the director of a small synagogue who said, "Do I have to report this to my synagogue that we received this threat?" And I said, "It's up to you. It's your synagogue. I don't make policy for you." And he said, "Because if I did, I don't think we'd exist anymore. I don't think people would come to shul anymore," and that's heartbreaking. And so, when I stress the need to do trainings on run, hide, fight, and the other big training that I really focus on is stop the bleed training, because I know it has saved lives when bad incidents have occurred. The problem is for faith-based institutions that you're introducing an element that, there's a risk here that is antithetical to the reason for that organization's existence.
Right.
And so you have to be very, very sensitive about that. And I think that's one of the challenges that we face when we're trying to secure communities. We have to keep emphasizing, hey, this is an incredibly safe endeavor. Worshiping is probably one of the safest things you can do. We don't think twice about the fact that you jumped into a car to drive here. That's far more dangerous than actually being here. But at the same time, we know that bad things have happened at these organizations, and we have to train accordingly. And so I think, to me, that's one of the unique challenges of faith-based organizations.
One of the things to pick up on that, I totally agree, Rob. That's the biggest issue. One of the things that really was effective was we created, I keep mentioning the word awareness. I mentioned it so much that we created what we called aware teams. And we literally put people in a traffic vest with the word aware on the back of it. And their job was really our first layer of contact with not only the people that are coming there to worship, But if there was someone coming there that had ill intent, we make contact with them, and we hopefully discourage that from happening long before they get any closer to the actual facility. But by creating that AWARE team, one of the things that was an interesting byproduct of that is the congregation became extremely happy and respectful of and thankful for that these people would come out, and you'd get out of your car and they would ask, "Hey, how you doing?" They'd look, and this would be an older person that'd say, "Hey, you need a ride? We'll get the golf cart over here to help you." And they just saw that as a service. And we actually had medical events. Someone collapses in the parking lot, and this AWARE team is right there. They've been trained appropriately. They know where our resources are. They know who to talk to on the radio to get some help there. So those things that are more commonplace and more likely to occur, we're better prepared to handle. And again, I focus on that AWARE. Just be aware of what's going on. And right now it's, it's a 110-degree day, and people might get some heat exhaustion being out there. Let's take care of that. Tomorrow, it may be a heightened threat to a particular facility because something's going on in the world that they're against.
And Mark, I'm sure you'd agree that one of the nice things about this training, for example, Stop the Bleed training is chances are you would never use it at your big organization. But you know what? If the kid falls off a bike and gets a bad cut,
right?
Exactly. Down the street from you, you're going to use it. Run, hide, fight. Chances are you would never use it at that institution. But what if you're in a bar or a theater or some other public place and something starts happening? That self-rescue skill is an important life skill that can be used anywhere. And so that's one of the things we always do when we emphasize that training.
Absolutely. So how do resource limitations uniquely challenge faith-based organizations in their efforts to enhance security measures?
Well, faith-based organizations rely on the generosity of their members, and it's look, all of us are in challenging times, and so we don't have unlimited pools of funds to address stuff. So we have to figure out, given the resources we have, how are we going to spend those appropriately and have the most effectiveness in dealing with those issues? That's one of the big challenges. Another one is congregations, whether they be synagogues, churches, mosques, Sikh temples, whatever, are designed to be welcoming. Let's bring people in. If it was up to me as a security professional, everything would be in underground bunkers, but, past metal detectors and so forth. But that doesn't send a message of what the essence of the institution is, which is to be welcoming and open and bringing people in. And it makes security concerns that much more challenging because they're not designed for security purposes. And security is expensive. And so retrofitting that, becomes incredibly important. So a huge part of this for any organization is to do a risk assessment, threat vulnerability risk assessment. Look at your organization, what the biggest threats are. And the biggest threats always make sure it's fire safe, right? That there's people know how to escape a fire, that there's fire suppression equipment and so forth. The severe weather and being able to shelter from that, and then also security. If something bad happens, do we know what to do and how to address?
Yeah, and just to emphasize that point, let me go back to what we talked about in the last podcast. Many of these institutions are small, and that congregation that Rob is referring to is small, and they don't have a deep pockets to be able to pull out the funds that are necessary to do some of these things. So those are unique challenge, coupled with, to Rob's point, the one we've echoed throughout this series is this is a place everybody wants to feel safe in. So how do we balance that? And the way to balance that is going back again to what Rob said in the last podcast and what I was echoing in, let's be aware of what's available to us, what we should be focusing on. That begins with that threat assessment that Rob was talking about. And by the way, oftentimes your sheriff's department or your police department has someone that'll come and do that for you. If not, the federal government actually has physical security advisors throughout the country that'll be more than willing to come and do that threat assessment for you, just to identify those things that maybe you're not aware of. And as simple as what's our fire plan? Again, I want to go back to that big campus that I've talked about. One of the first things that was revealed in a brand new building that they built, they had no fire exit plan.
Mm.
And I mean, let's just start there. I said, hey, we were in a meeting talking about what the plan could be. And I asked everybody in the room, okay, there's a fire alarm that goes off. Where are we going? What's the exit out of here? And it was literally blank stares. So just begin in the things that we can take care of that are unlikely to happen, but are actually more likely than the thing that may have driven this meeting in the first place, the fear that we might be subjected to some extremists that might want to do us harm. Let's work on the basics and work our way up there. And there's a lot of resources that'll help us enhance communication with our public safety community, coordinate with other faith-based organizations that might be in the community with us, training that Rob was talking about, whether it be through, again, other institutions or through grants that are available. We can build what we need given the resources that we have.
So we've mentioned this a few times throughout the series, the idea that, faith-based organizations are meant to be welcoming and have openness and inclusivity. So how do they find a balance between this ethos of openness and welcoming and things like that with this need for increased security to face some of the common threats that are happening?
So when I train, I use a slide, and the slide has 3 bullet points and pictures of and it's called the collective pronoun for meerkats. I just learned this the other day, is mob. So there's a mob of meerkats. And if you're familiar with meerkats, some of them are foraging around on the ground for food, but there's always 1 or 2 kind of looking around, making sure that everything is safe. And so that's a picture I use. That's a visual image that I use. And then I use 3 phrases. And I stole this blatantly from my colleague in the Bay Area of California. And the 3 phrases are: be welcoming. Number 1, most important job you have is to be welcoming. Welcome people to the congregation, practice radical hospitality. Say, we're glad you're here with us today. What brings you here today? The second bullet point is be alert. Look for something that looks out of place. And the third thing is be curious. Find out why somebody is interested in attending your institution. That's going to be the way you recognize somebody who potentially has ill intent, but it's also the way that you can find out how the organization can help them in their faith journey. So those are the 3 things we really emphasize: is be welcoming, be alert, and be curious.
I'll add to that. I usually go to, especially when I'm talking to Christian-based organizations, I go right to the good book that they use as their guidebook. And I go to a particular verse in the book of Acts that says, keep watch over yourselves and the flock with which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. You have a responsibility to be shepherds of the people that are there, and you have an obligation to protect them. So I love your I might steal that too, Rob, but It's a great analogy. It's a great illustration of what, hey, there's people here, they're focused on their worship. Our job is just keep our head up and be aware and looking around, and if there's something that should be paid attention to, we go over and take a look at it. It's a great illustration. It simplifies it. I'm stealing it.
I stole it from Rafi, so
okay.
It's only fair.
So how do cultural and religious sensitivities impact the approach to security within faith-based organizations?
Well, one of the challenges that some organizations face is that people dress differently and look differently than the predominant culture. And if I'm in a sanctuary of a synagogue, I try to be respectful and cover my head with a kippah, and as most Jewish men do, they wear kippot when they're in services, and um, they're comfortable. So I forgot that I had it on, and I, because I'm bald, used a little two-sided tape to keep it in place, and then sort of forgotten about it. Walked across the street into a grocery store, and somebody said some pretty horrible things to me, assuming that I was Jewish. And I probably did not respond as professionally as I should have, but I responded. But it dawned on me just the act of faith wearing different clothing. And I could just imagine, being a Muslim or, and particularly Orthodox Jew, the reason that there are more random attacks on Orthodox Jews is because they're identifiably Jewish. Whereas, people from the Reformed and Conservative synagogues may not be as identifiably Jewish if they're not wearing that kippah or yarmulke. I think that's one of the real challenges around securing some institutions. And then the other thing, frankly, Christians who wear a cross or another article of faith, may be subject to that as well.
Yeah, I think there's the big word in this question is cultural and religious sensitivities. So there's a culture. You could be in a community. You could live in a place where the culture in that area of with which you reside, there's a natural divide, if you will, between the general populace and this faith-based organization. And that divide could extend to the people in public safety to that faith-based organization. There may be a divide that's from within the faith-based organization. Hey, it's a trust issue. And that divide may be in reverse, where we don't understand that community, we don't make contact with that community, so we kind of operate. And my point is that the last thing you want to have happen is for those two audiences to come together when a bad thing is happening. If we can foster, go back to that word I used before, unity, communication amongst those diverse communities within, those diverse groups within, at least there's an understanding. Again, we're not asking for people to believe the same way. We're just saying be aware of what they do, what their resources are or aren't, and if something were to happen, how we're going to work together. Mm-hmm. I think that is the sensitivity, if you will, that might exist, and we just have to be aware of it. We have to be aware of it on the security side of it and the public safety side of it. We have to be aware of it on the faith-based community side of it. What are those sensitivities or divides that might be preventing us from being a little bit better at responding to or preventing something from happening?
Absolutely. So to wrap up this series, what advice do you have for faith-based organizations who are beginning the process of strengthening security? And sort of what do those first steps look like, in your opinion?
Well, I'll go first. I believe in prayer. And what I mean by that, that's an acronym. I believe in praying obviously has an important part to a faith-based community. But the other part of the P in prayer is plan, prepare, protect, and practice, right? So prepare for those types of events. And again, beyond just the scope of an active threat, all the things that might affect you as an institution, whether they be naturally based, whether they be technological challenges, whether they be human actions, crime against your organization. Plan for it, then prepare for it. Preparing means I've got to train for it. I've got to make sure that we're able to respond to a particular event like that. Protect and practice. Institute the plan to do that. Practice it. Don't just go through one set of training and 4 years from now Because what's happening in these institutions, right? There's turnover. There's people are moving away, new people coming in. We can't just do it one time and expect that everybody's on the same page. So how do we practice that? And then reassess. The R in that is just reassess yearly. Just how are we doing? Are we executing a good plan here? Are we putting a good awareness plan in place here? How can we improve it? What can we do to be better in our relationship with our public safety community? And that gets to the next word, enhance. Just how do I make it better? And the last R in the word prayer is repeat. Just continuously do this. And the resources that you can reach out to, especially for those smaller organizations that we've talked about earlier, there's a lot of federal programs, whether it be through CISA, whether it be through DHS itself, whether it be through FEMA, the Department of Justice. There's a lot of resources available to help with that. And actually, there's some grant funding available. But that's the general category. I don't want to take up all the space here, Rob.
But I think that's a good point. I mean, I think the first step is, look, confront the safety of your congregants is an issue. I was involved in church committees for decades, and I remember one discussion about security, the church I was at, and that is whether we should change the locks. They were last changed sometime during the Eisenhower administration. No one had any idea how many keys were out there. And that's the one conversation I ever remember about security of the organization. And, shame on us. It's an important responsibility of a faith-based organization to protect its members. And so do it. Start a committee and talk about security. The other thing that's important when you do those assessments is, I consider myself a security professional, many would argue, but it's a bad idea for me to do a security assessment in my own house.
Mm-hmm.
Because, that window sticks, the lock doesn't work. And so I just sort of tune that one out. But a professional come in and say, hey, if I'm a burglar, that's the first window I'm gonna do. Having an outside view to create that threat tolerability risk assessment is far superior than trying to do it yourself for your organization. And this is an example where interfaith works, interfaith cooperation might work really well. The neighboring church can come in and help you assess how would I address security at your synagogue, and you can do that for the church down the street. So there's a good opportunity to do that and engaging the outsider. And then, as Mark alluded to, and I hate to create more competition for these funds, but there is a good source of grant funding called the Nonprofit Security Grant Program that's available through FEMA. And we have had several institutions, not just in the Jewish community, but Christian hospitals, mosques, receive that funding to bolster physical security. The whole program is designed to harden soft targets, and sadly, faith-based organizations are often the softest targets there are.
Thank you. That's about all we have for this series. Thank you both so much for joining us, and hopefully talk again soon.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, please send us an email at podcast@ncbrt.lsu.edu. Make sure you subscribe to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.